You have ruled Libya for more than 4 decades, and now you are leaving Sirte in a convoy under fire. The country you once controlled through armed forces, political committees, money, fear, loyalty, and spectacle has narrowed to a few damaged vehicles moving through a war zone. It is October 20th, 2011. You are Muammar Gaddafi, the man who came to power in a military coup as a young officer and became one of the world's most recognizable leaders. For years, your image has been difficult to separate from Libya itself. Your speeches could last for hours. Your political system claimed to place power in the hands of ordinary people, but real authority remained concentrated around you, your family, and the network that depended on your rule. On this last day, that system is gone, in almost every practical sense. The capital has fallen. Much of the country is controlled by forces that rose against you. Foreign aircraft are operating overhead. The city where you were born has become one of the final places connected to your survival. But your last day cannot be understood only as the story of a convoy, an airstrike, and a capture. It is the end of a much longer contradiction. You presented yourself as a revolutionary who had overthrown a monarchy, expelled foreign influence, redistributed national wealth, and given Libya an independent voice. Your opponent saw a ruler who had built a state around himself, crushed dissent, and made peaceful political change nearly impossible. Both views shaped the country that existed in 2011. You were born in 1942, when Libya was still under Italian colonial rule during the Second World War. The country had enormous territory, a relatively small population, and oil wealth that would soon transform it. Before oil, much of Libya was poor and lightly developed. After oil, the central question became simple but enormous. Who would control the money, and what kind of country would it create? In 1969, you and a group of fellow officers removed King Idris from power. The coup was swift, and it succeeded with little public resistance. You were not yet 30. You framed the revolution as a break from the old order. No more monarchy, no more dependence on foreign powers, no more elite control over the country's resources. For many Libyans, the early years brought visible change. Oil revenues funded schools, housing, medical services, roads, and public institutions. Libya gained a stronger presence in regional politics. You spoke constantly about Arab unity, independence, and resistance to imperialism. You positioned Libya as a country that would not simply follow the wishes of larger powers. That independence was real in one sense. Libya did not become a client state of a single larger power. It made its own alliances, funded causes across Africa and the Middle East, and often acted unpredictably on the world stage. Yet independence abroad came with tighter control at home. You rejected conventional political parties and parliamentary democracy. In their place, you promoted a system of popular congresses and committees. Officially, ordinary citizens would govern directly. In practice, the system did not create open competition for power. Public criticism of your rule could bring punishment. Institutions that might have restrained you were weak, reshaped, or controlled by people whose positions depended on loyalty. You also published your own political ideas in the Green Book. It argued that existing political systems were flawed and that Libya had found a different path. Supporters treated these ideas as the foundation of a new political order. Critics saw them as language that justified one-man rule while avoiding the title of president. You did not always call yourself a president. You used titles that suggested revolutionary guidance rather than ordinary office. But the distinction mattered less than the reality. Major decisions still led back to you. Over time, Libya became difficult to read from the outside. It had ministries, armed forces, security agencies, local committees, and state companies. But personal relationships could matter more than formal rules. Tribes, regions, military units, family members, and trusted insiders all had roles in the balance of power. The system could look chaotic, but it held because no major center of power was allowed to become fully independent from you. That arrangement gave you flexibility. It also left the state vulnerable. A country with strong institutions can survive a leader's mistakes, illness, absence, or defeat. A country built around one ruler has fewer places to turn when that ruler is challenged. When the crisis came, Libya did not have a widely trusted political structure capable of absorbing anger and negotiating a transition. It had competing armed groups, regional divisions, and institutions that many people associated with your rule. For years, however, the appearance of stability was enough. Oil continued to provide revenue. Many Libyans benefited from education, subsidized goods, and public services. Some remembered the instability and poverty of earlier decades. Others believed that, whatever the system's flaws, it had protected Libya from the civil wars and invasions seen elsewhere. You used that fear as part of your message. You warned that chaos would follow if your government fell. In 2011, that warning would become partly true, but not in a way that saved you. The immediate crisis began during the wider wave of uprisings across the Arab world. Governments that had appeared permanent suddenly faced demonstrations, defections, and armed resistance. In Libya, protests broke out in February 2011. The response from your government was forceful. Violence escalated quickly. Opposition groups armed themselves. Cities changed hands. The political conflict became a civil war. At first, you did not speak as a leader preparing to leave. You spoke as someone confronting rebellion. You blamed armed groups, foreign interference, extremists, and traitors. Some of those forces would become part of Libya's conflict. But the uprising also included Libyans who had lived for years without meaningful ways to challenge your rule. The speed of events exposed the limits of your system. Units of the armed forces split, diplomats defected, officials who had served you for years began to calculate whether your government could survive. The opposition formed political bodies and sought international recognition. Your supporters still controlled significant territory and had weapons, money, and local networks, but the image of total control had broken. Then the conflict became international. The United Nations authorized measures intended to protect civilians, and NATO began military action against your forces. The stated aim was not formally described as removing you from power, but the practical effect was clear. Your military movements became exposed from the air. Forces opposing you gained room to advance. The conflict was no longer only a contest between Libyans on the ground. You had spent much of your political life challenging Western governments. At different times you had confronted them openly, negotiated with them, and sought a return to more normal relations. In the years before the uprising, Libya had reduced some of its international isolation. Foreign companies returned. Diplomatic ties improved. You were received by leaders who had once treated you as untouchable. That did not create a lasting shield. When the uprising became war, foreign military intervention changed the balance. It did not explain every part of Libya's revolt. The rebellion had domestic causes, but outside air power mattered decisively. Your forces were fighting enemies on the ground, while NATO aircraft could strike military targets from above. By late summer, Tripoli had fallen to anti-Gaddafi forces. The place from which you had ruled was no longer yours. Images of rebels inside compounds associated with your government traveled around the world. Symbols that had represented permanence suddenly looked abandoned. You were still alive, still communicating at times, and still calling for resistance. But you were no longer operating as the unquestioned ruler of Libya. You were a fugitive leader in a country where the old chain of command had fractured. Sirte became central because it was more than a military position. It was your hometown, a place where support for you remained stronger than in many other areas. It also sat on a strategic stretch of Libya's Mediterranean coast. As opposition forces closed in, the city was devastated by weeks of fighting. Civilians were trapped in increasingly dangerous conditions. Buildings, streets, and basic services were damaged or destroyed. The final battle was not a clean contest between two organized armies. It was confused, local, and brutal. Fighters on different sides had uneven training and loose command structures. Some were driven by political opposition, some by regional loyalties, some by anger over the violence of the war. Many had personal losses. In that environment, rules could collapse very quickly. On the morning of October 20th, You attempt to leave Sirte with the convoy. Accounts of the final movement differ, and parts of the exact sequence remain disputed. What is clear is that the convoy comes under attack, including from the air, and is disrupted. You do not escape. You are found alive by fighters from the opposing side. This is the point where the fall of your government becomes the death of a man. You are no longer behind a podium, inside a guarded compound, or surrounded by the ceremonies of power. You are in the custody of armed people who have just emerged from months of war against your forces. Video recorded that day showed you alive after capture. It also showed a chaotic and violent scene. Soon afterward, you are dead. The circumstances of your death drew immediate scrutiny. Official accounts changed and were challenged. Questions were raised about whether you were killed in crossfire, beaten, or executed after capture. What is not seriously in doubt is that you did not receive a stable legal process before your death. There was no trial in which the full record of your rule, the allegations against your government, and the conduct of all sides during the war could be examined in court. For your enemies, your death represented the collapse of a regime they considered oppressive and violent. For some supporters, it was the killing of a national leader by victorious enemies backed by foreign intervention. For many Libyans, it was neither a clean liberation nor a simple tragedy. It was the end of one era and the beginning of a dangerous vacuum. The scenes after your death carried another consequence. Your body was publicly displayed for a time. Images spread across the world. They were proof that the ruler who had dominated Libya for decades was gone. They were also evidence of how completely the norms of state authority had broken down. Your death did not settle Libya's future. That was the central failure in the assumption surrounding the war. Remove the leader, and a new order will naturally take shape. But Libya had no single opposition capable of speaking for the entire country. The groups that fought against you did not share one ideology, one chain of command, or one plan for governing after victory. Some wanted democratic institutions. Some wanted stronger regional power. Some were driven by local grievances. Some had weapons and no reason to surrender them once the war ended. The country had been held together for years by a state that was deeply personal. When that center disappeared, the institutions beneath it were too weak to manage the competition that followed. Libya moved into years of political division and armed conflict. Rival governments emerged. Militias controlled areas of territory. Foreign states pursued their own interests through local partners. Oil, the resource that had long given Libya wealth and strategic importance, also became part of the struggle for power. This does not mean that your rule was the only cause of Libya's later instability. The uprising, the war, foreign intervention, regional rivalries, and decisions made after your fall all mattered. But your system left a particular inheritance. It discouraged independent political life while concentrating authority in a narrow circle. It could command obedience. It could not easily produce a peaceful succession. That is why your last day matters beyond its violence. For 42 years, you built a political identity around defiance. You were the revolutionary who never became an ordinary head of state. You rejected the language of conventional government while exercising power more personally than many presidents or kings. You could appear as an anti-colonial figure to admirers abroad and as an unpredictable dictator to critics at home. You invested Libya's wealth in public development, yet many Libyans had no safe way to decide who governed them. You warned that removing you would bring disorder, but the warning came from a system that had made orderly change extremely difficult. By October 2011, those contradictions had reached their endpoint. You are captured, not in a palace or a command center, but after trying to leave a collapsing battlefield. The man who had turned Libya into a stage for his revolution is now dependent on the protection of no one. The political theory, the uniforms, the speeches, the carefully managed image of unbreakable authority, none of it can control the crowd around you. Your death closes your personal story. It does not close Libya's. The country you leave behind is not simply your creation, and its suffering after 2011 cannot be reduced to one person. But the final day reveals the deepest weakness of your rule. You built power that could endure for decades, but not a political system that could survive its own ruler. When the convoy leaves Sirte, your government is already over. When you die later that day, Libya loses the man who had dominated it since 1969. What remains is a country still trying to answer the question your rule never allowed it to answer freely. Who has the right to govern Libya after Muammar Gaddafi?